The phone was still warm in my hand when I realized my entire marriage had been a lie I'd been telling myself for 6 years. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, and I was standing in the middle of my kitchen, surrounded by paint swatches, tile samples, and contractor invoices spread across the granite countertop like a paper quilt. The renovation was going beautifully. Every decision I'd made, the subway tile backsplash, the matte black fixtures, the open shelving replacing those hideous upper cabinets, was coming together exactly the way I'd planned it for 2 years. I had saved $23,000 of my own money for this. My money, my account, my apartment. And then my phone rang. "You need to explain yourself." My husband Brandon's voice hit me like a slap before I even said hello. Not raised, not screaming, something worse. That low, deliberate tone he used when he'd already decided he was right and I was wrong, and this conversation was just a formality. "My mother called me crying, Ashley. Crying! She said you refused to renovate her apartment and told her it wasn't your problem. Is that what happened?" I set down the tile sample I was holding. Beige. His mother's favorite color. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Brandon, that is not what happened. I don't want to hear your version right now." He cut me off so smoothly it barely registered at first. Then it did. "I'm already in the car. I'm on my way home. And Ashley?" A pause that felt like a held breath. "You are going to regret this badly. I promise you that." The line went dead. I stood there for a full 30 seconds, not moving. The contractor, a quiet guy named Marcus, who I'd hired after 3 weeks of interviews and reference checks, was in the bathroom retiling the shower. I could hear the rhythmic scrape of his trowel. The smell of fresh grout and new wood hung in the air. Everything I had worked toward. And somewhere across town, my husband was driving toward me with his mother's voice in his ear and a threat fresh on his lips. I didn't know it yet, but when Brandon walked through that door 40 minutes later, what he found would change everything. Not just for me, for both of us. Forever. But to understand what happened that afternoon, I have to take you back. Back to before the renovation, before the phone call, before the version of my life that looked so solid from the outside it fooled even me. My name is Ashley Mercer. Well, Ashley Caldwell now, or it was, and for 6 years I believed I had built something real. Brandon and I met at a work conference in Nashville, the kind where everyone wears lanyards and pretends to care about the afternoon panel sessions, but really just wants to get to the open bar. He was in commercial real estate. I was in marketing for a mid-size healthcare company based out of Columbus, Ohio, and we ended up at the same high-top table arguing about whether the hotel's Nashville hot chicken was an insult to the city. He said yes. I said it didn't matter as long as it tasted good. He laughed, that big, easy laugh that I would spend the next 6 years trying to earn, and by the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers and made plans to actually visit a real hot chicken place the next morning before our flights. That was May, 8 years ago. We did long distance for 14 months, Columbus to Atlanta, which is brutal in a way that either kills a relationship or welds it together. For us, it felt like the second thing. Every other weekend was a flight or a 5-hour drive. We racked up credit card points, learned each other's coffee orders, fought about small things, and made up fast. By the time he asked me to move to Atlanta, I didn't hesitate. I gave notice at my job, found a remote contract position with a digital agency, and packed my Honda Accord with everything I couldn't fit in the moving truck. We got married 2 years later. Small ceremony, 62 people, a vineyard outside Marietta on a Saturday in September when the Georgia heat had finally broken just enough to breathe. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings. Brandon cried at the altar, actually cried, and his best man Jake made a toast that made everyone laugh and then immediately tear up. My best friend Renee caught the bouquet and pretended she didn't want to. It was, genuinely, the best day of my life up to that point. We bought a condo in Midtown Atlanta 14 months after the wedding. 1,200 square feet on the 8th floor, 2 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the park. We paid $387,000 for it, split the down payment, and both our names were on the deed. That felt important to me, having my name on something. Growing up with a mom who went through a brutal divorce when I was 11, losing the house, the savings, the whole assumed future, I had a complicated relationship with the word ours. I wanted things to be documented. I wanted to know exactly where I stood. For most of our marriage, I thought I did. Brandon worked hard and made good money. His firm handled commercial leases for some big retail chains expanding into the Southeast, and his commissions some years were genuinely impressive. But his spending matched his income in a way that made me nervous. New car every 3 years, golf memberships, season tickets to the Falcons that I think he attended maybe 4 times. I was the one who maxed out the 401k contributions, who tracked the HOA fees, who kept a spreadsheet for the emergency fund. He called me the CFO of this household, like it was a cute joke. I called it basic survival instinct. His mother, Karen Caldwell, lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Smyrna, about 25 minutes west of us. She was 63, recently retired from her position as an office manager at a dental practice, and she had a talent for making me feel like a guest in my own life. Not loudly. Karen didn't do loud. She did it with small, precise cuts. A comment about my cooking at Thanksgiving, a question about when we were having children, delivered with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, a habit of rearranging things in our condo when she visited, and then insisting she was just helping tidy up. Brandon adored her. That was clear and simple and non-negotiable. She was a widow. His dad had died of a heart attack when Brandon was 19, and she had raised him and his younger sister Melissa mostly alone through his college years, working 2 jobs, sacrificing constantly. I respected that. I genuinely did. But Karen had never fully forgiven Brandon for marrying someone who had opinions. For the first 3 years, I tried. God, I tried. I invited her to things. I called her on her birthday and Mother's Day without being reminded. I learned that she liked her coffee with exactly 1 creamer and no sugar, that she hated the color orange, that she watched Jeopardy every night and did not appreciate being talked to during it. I sent her an edible arrangements on her retirement day because I thought it would make her feel celebrated. She texted Brandon, not me, to say it was a nice gesture. That was as warm as it ever got. The renovation idea had been brewing in my head for almost 2 years by the time I actually pulled the trigger. The condo was starting to feel dated in ways that bothered me every morning when I made coffee and stared at the yellowing laminate cabinets. I had the money saved, my own savings, from freelance contracts I'd taken on top of my regular job, squirreled away in a separate account that I'd opened because I wanted to have something that was mine to make decisions about. $23,000 over 20 months of Saturday mornings and late nights. I told Brandon about the renovation plan. He shrugged and said, "Sure, as long as you're not touching the living room TV setup." And that was the extent of his involvement. The contractors started the first week of October, and that's when Karen apparently decided she had opinions. She had mentioned once, maybe 3 months before the renovation started, that her apartment kitchen was getting old and that she'd love to update it someday. That was the full conversation. I said something like, "Oh, that would be nice." Because what else do you say? I didn't offer to fund it. I didn't promise anything. It was small talk at Sunday dinner, the kind that evaporates before you've finished chewing. But Karen Caldwell had a memory like a steel trap and an imagination that could build a palace from a passing comment. When she heard I was spending money on my own kitchen renovation, something shifted in her. I didn't know this yet. I was deep in tile selections and lighting fixtures and a beautiful Zalige backsplash that cost more than I expected, but was absolutely worth it. I was happy, focused, doing something for myself, finally, in a way that felt complete and justified and mine. And then my phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and my husband's voice came through the speaker like something cold pressing against the back of my neck. "You are going to regret this badly." Marcus's trowel scraped against the tile in the bathroom. The paint swatches fanned out on my counter. The afternoon light came through the big windows and landed on everything I had built, and I stood there holding my phone and trying to understand what I had done wrong. The answer, I would learn, was nothing. But also, everything was about to become clear in a way I had never let myself look at directly before. Because when Brandon walked through that door 40 minutes later and stopped in his tracks, it wasn't the renovation that froze him. It was what he saw that he wasn't supposed to see. He came through the door at 4:47 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock on the microwave, the one I'd already told Marcus we were replacing, and counting down the minutes like they were something I could control. I had spent those 40 minutes doing something I rarely do. Nothing. I didn't call Renee. I didn't call my mom. I didn't text Brandon back or rehearse what I was going to say. I just stood in my kitchen with my arms crossed over my chest and waited. And the waiting felt like holding a wound closed with your bare hands. Marcus had finished for the day and packed up. I'd asked him to. He'd looked at me when I said it. Really looked, the way people do when they can tell something is wrong, but they've been hired to tile a shower and not manage someone's marriage, and said quietly that he'd be back Thursday. I nodded. He left. And then I was alone in the apartment with the smell of fresh grout and the sound of my own breathing. When Brandon's key hit the lock, I didn't move. He pushed the door open and stepped in, and I watched his face do something I had never seen it do before. He stopped. Literally stopped mid-stride with one foot still in the hallway, his phone in his hand, his jaw set with whatever speech he'd been rehearsing on the drive over. His eyes swept the kitchen, the new open shelving, the Zelige backsplash glinting in the late afternoon sun, the matte black fixtures. And then they landed on something else. Something that had nothing to do with the renovation at all. On my kitchen counter, between the paint swatches and the contractor invoices, was an open folder. A manila folder with a green sticky note on the front in my handwriting. Apartment, ownership docs. And next to it, printed out and paper-clipped neatly, was a copy of the condo deed. He had gone very still. "Brandon," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "We need to talk." "What is—" He stopped, swallowed. "Why is the deed out?" "Because I pulled it this morning, after you called me." I uncrossed my arms and put my hands flat on the counter. "Sit down." He didn't sit. He walked slowly toward the counter and looked at the folder without touching it, the way you look at something that might bite you. Then he looked up at me, and the prepared anger was still there, but there was something else underneath it now, something uncertain and a little bit afraid. And I recognized that look because I had been wearing it for 6 years without knowing it. "Ashley, I want to talk about my mother." "I know you do." I kept my voice even. "And we will, but first I need you to understand something. This apartment, the one you just drove here to threaten me about, has my name on the deed. The $23,000 renovation was paid for out of my personal savings account, which your name has never been on. Your mother's apartment is a 2-bedroom rental in Smyrna that cost $1,400 a month, which you and I have never, not once, discussed contributing to." I paused. "Now, would you like to explain to me what exactly I am going to regret?" The silence that followed was one of the longest of my life. Brandon set his phone face down on the counter. He pulled out a bar stool and sat. And for just a moment, I thought we were going to have an actual conversation, the kind that married people are supposed to have, and maybe something would shift and we'd find our way to the other side of this. Instead, he said, "She heard you were spending $23,000 and she felt left out." I stared at him. "Left out?" "She's my mother, Ashley. She's on a fixed income now. She sees you doing all of this." He gestured vaguely at the kitchen around us. "And she just thought, maybe, since we had the money—" "You don't have this money," I said. "I have this money. It's in an account in my name. I earned it on top of my regular salary doing freelance work for 2 years. That is not we money." "We're married." "Yes." I let that word sit there for a second. "We are. And when I told you about this renovation 3 months ago, you said, and I quote, 'Sure, as long as you're not touching the living room TV setup.' That was your entire contribution to this conversation. You didn't ask where the money was coming from. You didn't offer to help. You didn't ask a single question. And now your mother has decided she deserves a renovation too, and somehow that is my fault? Brandon rubbed his face with both hands. She's not saying you owe her anything. You literally called me and said I was going to regret this badly. Those are your words. What was I supposed to regret, Brandon? Not giving my mother-in-law money I earned? Spending it on my own home instead? He didn't answer, and I watched him not answer, and something inside me went very quiet and very cold. And that was the moment I understood that this conversation wasn't going to fix anything. Because the problem wasn't the renovation, and it wasn't Karen's apartment in Smyrna, and it wasn't even the phone call. The problem was something that had been there for 6 years, and I had just never let myself see it clearly. I slept in the second bedroom that night. Not because he asked me to, and not because I was afraid of him. Brandon wasn't that kind of angry, he was the sulking, wall-building kind. But because I needed to think, and I couldn't think lying next to someone who had called me from his car to tell me I'd be sorry. The thinking I did that night was not the kind I'd done before. In the past, when we'd had a fight, my thinking would run along a track. What did I do wrong? How do I fix this? What does he need from me right now? It was the track I'd been trained on by years of small concessions and large silences, by choosing to interpret Karen's coldness as personality rather than intent, by telling myself that Brandon's emotional unavailability was just how some men were, and I was lucky in other ways. I had been so committed to that track that I'd basically built a life on top of it. That night, my thinking went somewhere different. I lay on the guest bed in the dark with my phone on my chest, and I started to actually look at things I had been carefully not looking at. Like the fact that Brandon had taken out a personal loan 8 months ago. I'd seen the paperwork by accident, a statement that came in the mail when he usually intercepted it, and hadn't mentioned it to me. $40,000. I'd told myself it was for his business, that it wasn't my business to ask, that he'd tell me when it was the right time. I had never asked, not once. Like the fact that his sister Melissa had called me 6 months ago, out of nowhere, and asked in a strained voice whether Brandon had mentioned anything about the family finances. I'd said no, and she'd gone quiet in a way that made me uncomfortable, and then pivoted to asking about Thanksgiving plans, and I had let her. I had taken the pivot and run with it because I didn't want to know. Like the fact that Karen had asked me, twice in the past year, whether Brandon and I had updated our wills. Not in a morbid way, in a pointed way. In the way that someone asks a question when they already know the answer they're angling toward. I lay there, and I let myself look at all of it, and by 2 in the morning I was not sleeping, and my hands were shaking slightly, and I knew that I was not just angry about a phone call. I was at the edge of something enormous that I had been skirting for a very long time. I called Renee at 7 a.m. the next morning, as soon as I heard Brandon leave for work. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake, which meant she was a better friend than I deserved. "He threatened you," she said, after I told her the short version, not a question. "He said I'd regret it." "Ashley," her voice was very careful, "how long has Karen been pushing on the money stuff?" I thought about it. "It's escalated this year, but honestly, little things for longer." "Okay." A pause. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer it. When did you last look at your joint accounts? Like, really look?" I opened my mouth to say recently, and then stopped. Because the truth was that I handled the household budget, the HOA fees, the utilities, the mortgage, but Brandon had a separate checking account for his business expenses and commissions, and I had my own personal savings account, and our joint account was where we both deposited a set amount each month for household costs. I tracked the joint account. I didn't track his. I had considered that respectful of his financial independence. I had considered that trust. "I don't look at his account," I said. "Right." Renee said it gently, but she said it. "I think you should talk to someone, not a couples counselor, a different kind of someone." I knew what she meant. I sat with it for a second. "You mean a lawyer?" "I mean a lawyer," she confirmed. I didn't call a divorce attorney that morning. I wasn't there yet, or I wasn't letting myself be there yet. But I did something else. I called my bank and asked them to walk me through every transaction in the joint account for the past 18 months. I sat at the kitchen counter with a legal pad and a pen, and I wrote down everything the representative read to me, and by the time we finished, I had 3 pages of notes and a feeling in my stomach like I'd swallowed a stone. There were 11 transfers out of our joint account in the past 14 months, amounts ranging from $800 to $3,400, all of them to the same external account. Not his business account, I knew that routing number. A different one. When I asked the bank representative if they could tell me the account holder's name, she said she couldn't provide that over the phone. But she told me the account was registered at a Smyrna address. I sat there with my legal pad and the pen still in my hand, and I looked at the 11 transfers and I did the math. $12,400. Transferred out of the account we both contributed to, without my knowledge, without a conversation, to an account in Smyrna. Karen Caldwell lived in Smyrna. My hands had stopped shaking by then. That was the strange thing. You'd think learning something like that would make you shake harder. Instead, I went very, very still, the same way I had when Brandon threatened me on the phone. Like my body understood that this was the moment that required clarity, not panic. I took a photograph of every page of my legal pad with my phone. I emailed the photos to myself. Then I opened my laptop and typed "Divorce Attorney, Atlanta, Georgia" into the search bar, and the first thing I did was read 3 pages of results, and the second thing I did was write down 4 phone numbers, and the third thing I did was dial the first one. The receptionist who answered was professional and warm. She asked me what my situation was, in broad strokes. I told her. She asked if I could come in Thursday at 2. Marcus was coming back Thursday morning to finish the bathroom tile. "Yes," I said. "Thursday at 2 works perfectly." I hung up and looked around my kitchen. The Zalige backsplash, the matte black fixtures, the open shelving where the hideous upper cabinets used to be. And for the first time since Brandon's phone call, I didn't feel the cold thing pressing against the back of my neck. I felt something different. Something that hadn't been there in a long time. What I didn't know yet was that Thursday was going to bring more than just a lawyer's appointment. Because on Thursday morning, while Marcus was finishing the bathroom tile and I was getting ready to drive downtown, my phone was going to ring again. And this time, it wasn't going to be Brandon. It was going to be Melissa. Melissa called at 8:14 in the morning, while Marcus was still setting up his equipment in the bathroom, and I was standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee I hadn't actually tasted yet. "Ashley." Her voice was tight. Not the strained version from 6 months ago. This was something past strained, something that had been wound too tight for too long and was starting to fray at the edges. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not hang up." "I'm not going to hang up," I said. "I talked to Brandon last night." She paused. I heard her take a breath like she was about to jump off something. "He told me what happened. The phone call, what he said to you. And Ashley, I've been sitting on something for months, and I can't sit on it anymore." I set down my coffee cup. "I'm listening." "My mom has been asking Brandon for money for over a year. Not occasionally, regularly." Another breath. "He didn't tell you because he knew He knew it was coming from your joint account, and he didn't want to have the conversation." The stone I'd swallowed the night before got heavier. "I know," I said quietly. "I pulled the transaction history yesterday. $12,400. 14 months. The silence on her end was the kind that means someone has been bracing for an explosion that didn't come. "You already know." "I know about the transfers. I know they went to a Smyrna account. I have an appointment with a divorce attorney today at 2 o'clock. Melissa made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Then, "Ashley, there's more." I gripped the edge of the counter. "Tell me." "The $40,000 loan. Brandon took it out 8 months ago." She said it carefully, like she was handling something breakable. "Mom told him she needed it. That she had debts she hadn't told anyone about. Credit cards, a personal loan she'd taken out 3 years ago that she'd been rolling over. She told him if he didn't help her, she'd lose everything. He didn't tell you because..." Ashley, I don't know exactly why. I think he was ashamed. I think he told himself he'd pay it back before you noticed. I thought about the routing number I didn't recognize on that bank statement. The one I'd told myself was for his business. The one I had specifically chosen not to ask about because I'd called it trust. Is the $40,000 in the same Smyrna account? I don't know, Melissa said. I only know what he told me. And I know he told me because I pushed him last night after he called me furious about the renovation. I told him he was losing his mind going after you about a kitchen renovation when he'd been draining your joint account for over a year. Her voice had some heat in it now. He started crying, said he felt trapped between you and Mom, that he couldn't make everyone happy. The thing about hearing that your husband cried is that a year ago, it would have made me want to hold him. That morning, standing in my kitchen with 3 pages of handwritten notes on my legal pad and a 2 o'clock appointment on my calendar, it made me feel nothing except tired. Melissa, I said, thank you for telling me. I mean that. I know this wasn't easy. What are you going to do? I looked at the Zalige backsplash. The morning light was coming through the windows at an angle that hit the tiles perfectly, the way I'd imagined when I chose them, and they were exactly as beautiful as I'd hoped. I'm going to go to my appointment, I said, and then I'm going to figure out what comes next. The attorney's name was Patricia Nguyen, and she had an office on Peachtree Street with a waiting room that was calm and neutral in a way that felt deliberately designed to de-escalate whatever you'd walked in carrying. She was 51, brisk without being cold, and she had the particular quality of someone who has heard every version of every story and is not going to be surprised by yours, which was exactly what I needed. I laid everything out for her, the joint account transfers, all 11 of them, with dates and amounts written in my own handwriting, the personal loan, the conversation with Melissa, the deed with my name on it, the personal savings account that had funded the renovation, the phone call from Brandon with the threat. I had printed the bank photos from my email and brought them in a folder, and I watched Patricia's eyes move across each page with the same focused calm. The good news, she said when I finished, is that you've been more organized than most people who walk in here. She tapped the folder. This documentation matters. The transfers out of the joint account without your knowledge or consent is something we can work with. The personal loan is more complicated. If it was taken in his name only, it's his debt. If he used any joint assets as collateral, we need to know. I don't know if he used joint assets, I said. We'll find out. She said it simply, like it was already done. The condo deed, both names, correct? Both names. I have a copy here. And the renovation funds came entirely from your personal account, not the joint account? Entirely. I have records. Patricia nodded and made a note. In Georgia, marital property is subject to equitable distribution, which does not mean equal, it means fair, based on circumstances. The documentation you have about his unilateral transfers is going to be relevant to that conversation. She looked up at me. I want to ask you directly, is your goal divorce or is your goal leverage? I had thought about this on the drive over. Actually thought about it, not the way I'd been thinking for years, around the edges, through the gauze, but directly. 6 years ago, I said, I would have told you leverage. I would have wanted to save the marriage. I paused. I don't want to save this one. I want out, clean, fair, and documented. Patricia nodded once. Then let's talk about what clean and fair looks like. We were in her office for 90 minutes. When I left, I had a clear picture of the process, a retainer agreement in my bag, and a list of financial documents to gather. I also had the name of a forensic accountant she recommended, in case the personal loan situation turned out to be more tangled than it appeared. I drove home on 75 North with the windows down, even though it was October and the air had a bite to it, and I felt something I couldn't immediately name. Not happy. It wasn't happiness. It was the feeling of having finally put weight on a floor you've been tiptoeing across for years and discovering it holds. Brandon was home when I got back. He was sitting on the couch in the living room with the television off, which was how I knew he'd been waiting. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red around the edges, and he had the rumpled, collapsed quality of someone whose carefully maintained version of reality had started to come apart at the seams. "Melissa called me," he said, before I'd even taken off my jacket. "I know, she called me first." I hung up my jacket and turned around to face him. "How long were you going to keep doing it, Brandon?" He opened his mouth and closed it. Then, "I was going to tell you." "When?" He didn't answer that. Of course he didn't. "The $40,000 loan," I said. I kept my voice even. I had practiced this. "Did you use anything joint as collateral?" "No." He said it quickly. "It's a personal loan, just in my name." "And the $12,400 in transfers from our joint account. How long did you think before you transferred each one? Did you think about it at all, or did it just feel easier than having a conversation?" Brandon pressed his hands against his knees and looked at the floor. "She needed it, Ashley. She's my mother. She was drowning." "I understand she needed help." I sat down in the armchair across from him, not next to him on the couch. Distance that said something. "I understand she's your mother. What I do not understand is how you decided that the answer was to take money from our shared account without telling me. What I do not understand is how, when I called you to talk about it, you got in your car and drove here to threaten me instead." I panicked. He looked up. His eyes were wet. "She was crying. She said you'd refuse to help her, and I reacted. I shouldn't have said what I said." "No, you shouldn't have." I let that land. "But Brandon, the phone call was the last thing in a very long line of things. It just happened to be the thing I couldn't explain away." I looked at him steadily. "I'm filing for divorce." The word hit him the way I'd known it would. He went very still, the same way he'd gone still in the kitchen doorway 2 days ago, and I watched him process it. And for a moment, I saw the man from the high-top table in Nashville, the one with the easy laugh, and I felt a genuine and honest grief for that version of things, for what we could have been if either of us had been braver, earlier. "Ashley." "I have an attorney. I have documentation. I want this to be civil, and I want it to be fair, and I want it to be done." I stood up. "I am going to ask you to stay somewhere else for the next few weeks while we work through the process. Melissa offered, if you need a place." He stared at me. "You talked to Melissa about this?" "Melissa talked to me. There's a difference." I walked to the kitchen, picked up a glass, filled it with water. My hands were steady. "I don't want a war, Brandon. I never did. I just want what's mine." He left that evening with a duffel bag and his laptop. He stood in the doorway for a moment before he pulled it shut, and I thought he might say something final and important, something that would become the line I remembered. Instead, he just said, "I'm sorry, Ash," in a voice that sounded like he actually meant it, and then the door closed, and it was just me and the smell of fresh grout, and the Zelige backsplash, and the matte black fixtures, and the open shelving where the hideous upper cabinets used to be. I sat down on the kitchen floor, not dramatically, just because it felt like the right place to be, and I cried for about 15 minutes. Not for what I was losing, for how long I'd spent not letting myself see it clearly. Karen never apologized. I want to be honest about that. She sent Brandon a series of text messages after he told her we were divorcing, none of which acknowledged the transfers or the loan, all of which centered on how this was happening to her. Brandon showed me one of them by accident. He was scrolling through his phone looking for something else, and I caught a line that read, "She was always going to do this." And I made a decision in that moment not to spend any more energy thinking about Karen Caldwell than was legally necessary. The divorce was finalized 7 months later, in May. Georgia took its time, but Patricia Nguyen was thorough and precise and worth every dollar of her retainer. The condo went on the market in March. We sold it for $441,000, which after commissions and splitting the equity, gave me enough to put a significant down payment on a 2-bedroom in Virginia Highland that I had looked at twice and fallen in love with immediately. Brandon's personal loan stayed with him. The $12,400 in transfers from the joint account was factored into the equitable distribution settlement. Not a full dollar-for-dollar recoupment, Patricia explained, but enough that the final number was fair in a way I could live with. My name went on the new deed alone. Just mine, the way I wanted it. Marcus finished the bathroom tile in the Midtown condo the same week Brandon moved out. He came on Thursday morning as promised, worked quietly for 3 hours, and when he was done, he showed me the finished shower and asked what I thought. I told him it was perfect. He said he'd enjoyed the project. I tipped him generously and meant it. Renee came over the Friday after Brandon left, and we ordered Thai food and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a reason I couldn't name, and I told her everything. The transfers, the loan, the attorney appointment, all of it, and she listened without once saying she'd seen it coming, which is the kind of friend she is and why I've kept her for 12 years. "How are you feeling?" she asked, around midnight, when the wine was mostly gone and we'd moved from the kitchen to the couch. I thought about it honestly. "Like I can breathe," I said, which is a strange thing to say because I didn't know I was holding my breath. She nodded like she understood. I think she did. Here's what I know now that I didn't know when I was standing in my kitchen with paint swatches and a ringing phone and a husband's threat fresh in my ear. The moment you stop explaining away the thing you already know is not the moment of collapse. It's the moment of construction. It's the moment you stop building on someone else's foundation and start pouring your own. I kept the Zelige backsplash. Obviously. It is, as I suspected, absolutely worth it. The Virginia Highland apartment has a small backyard, a patio, really, with a garden bed along one side, and I spent the summer after the divorce learning to grow tomatoes and reading in the evenings and having people over for dinner and doing, for the first time in a long time, exactly what I wanted with the space I had built. Some mornings, I wake up before my alarm, and the first thing I feel is the quiet. Not the heavy quiet of a house where two people are pretending everything is fine, just regular quiet, the kind that belongs to you, the kind you can fill with anything you choose. I choose, most mornings, coffee and the window, and the particular satisfaction of owning every inch of what I'm looking at. That's enough. That's everything.